The moment I discovered my name wasn't on the Harrison family trust document was the same day I realized I'd never truly been considered family. 5 years of marriage, countless unpaid hours helping grow their real estate empire, and all I had to show for it was the bitter taste of betrayal. I'm Ethan Mitchell, and this is the story of how I was written out of my in-laws' dynasty, only to rewrite their entire legacy with my signature on acquisition papers they never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When Rebecca and I first got married, her family welcomed me with what I thought was open arms. The Harrisons were Boston real estate royalty, 3 generations of shrewd developers who transformed the skyline and amassed a fortune doing it. Walter Harrison, my father-in-law, had a handshake like a vice grip and the calculating eyes of someone perpetually assessing property value. His wife Victoria was all pearls and propriety, hosting charity galas while quietly pulling strings. Behind the scenes, "You've chosen well, Rebecca," Walter had announced at our engagement party, clapping me on the shoulder. "An MBA from Wharton and a head for numbers. He'll be an asset." An asset. Not a son-in-law, not family. I should have recognized the distinction then, but I was too dazzled by their world, too eager to prove my worth. For 5 years, I poured myself into Harrison Enterprises. I modernized their financial systems, identified undervalued properties before their competitors, and worked weekends to close deals that added millions to their bottom line. I was the first one in the office and the last to leave. My own father had taught me that dedication and hard work were the currencies of respect. I thought I was making deposits into an account that would eventually pay dividends. "The quarterly review meeting is this afternoon," Rebecca reminded me over breakfast. "Dad's going to present the updated trust allocations." "Finally," I said, straightening my tie. "After that Seaport District acquisition I orchestrated, I'm looking forward to seeing how they've restructured things." Rebecca stirred her coffee, avoiding my eyes. "Just don't expect too much, okay? Dad's traditional about these things." Traditional. The Harrison code word for keeping power concentrated in blood relations. The Harrison Enterprises boardroom felt unusually tense that day. Daniel, Rebecca's brother, gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret as I took my seat. His wife Olivia studied her manicure with sudden fascination. Natalie, the younger sister, was typing furiously on her phone. No one would meet my gaze. Walter entered last, leather portfolio in hand, Victoria gliding in behind him like a general's most trusted lieutenant. "Excellent quarter, everyone," Walter began, distributing documents with practiced precision. "The Seaport acquisition has exceeded projections by 12%, thanks in large part to Ethan's financial structuring." A brief nod in my direction. The closest thing to public praise he ever offered. "Now, as promised, we've updated the family trust allocations to reflect current contributions and future succession planning." I opened the document, flipping quickly through the legal jargon until I found the beneficiary section. Rebecca, Daniel, Olivia, Natalie. Even cousins I'd barely met at family gatherings. My finger traced down the list again, certain I'd missed something. My name wasn't there. 5 years of 60-hour weeks, of missed anniversaries and postponed vacations, of proving myself again, and again. And I wasn't even mentioned. "Is there a question, Ethan?" Walter asked, noticing my expression. I kept my voice steady. "I seem to be missing from the beneficiary list." The room went silent. Rebecca's hand found mine under the table, squeezing so hard it hurt. "The Harrison Trust is for family members, as it's been for 3 generations," Walter said, as if explaining something to a child. "Rebecca's portion naturally extends to your household." "Through Rebecca," Victoria added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The Harrison legacy remains intact that way." Translation: "We don't trust you not to divorce our daughter and take our money. But Daniel's wife is listed, I pointed out, my voice rising despite my best efforts. Walter cleared his throat. Olivia has been with the family for over a decade, and she's brought in significant client relationships through her family connections. And I've brought in over 30 million in new acquisitions in 5 years, I countered. For which you've been compensated with an excellent salary, Walter replied, closing his portfolio with finality. We value your contribution as an employee, Ethan. Employee, not family. Never family. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. I nodded mechanically at appropriate intervals, but my mind was racing, calculating, processing this new reality. Next to me, Rebecca sat rigid, her face a careful mask of neutrality. The expression she'd perfected growing up in a family where appearances mattered above all else. We drove home in silence, the leather seats of the luxury car Walter had generously leased for us suddenly feeling like just another golden handcuff. You knew, I finally said as we pulled into our driveway. Rebecca stared straight ahead. I suspected. Dad never actually confirmed until today. 5 years, Becca. 5 years I've killed myself for your family's company. Our company, she corrected automatically, then winced at her own words. No, I said, turning off the ignition with more force than necessary. Apparently not our company, their company, and I'm just the hired help who happens to be married to the boss's daughter. Inside our home, a beautiful Beacon Hill brownstone purchased with Harrison family assistance that suddenly felt less like generosity and more like another control mechanism, Rebecca finally broke. It's not fair, she admitted, slumping onto our designer sofa. You've contributed more than anyone else in the family besides Dad, but the trust. It's sacred to him. It's how his father controlled him, and how he controls all of us. Controls you? Rebecca looked up, her eyes suddenly clear. Why do you think Daniel gave up his dreams of becoming a chef? Why Natalie abandoned her nonprofit? Work? The trust is the carrot and the stick. Conform to Walter Harrison's vision or be cut off. I paced our living room, mind racing. And you never thought to mention this before I dedicated 5 years of my life to building someone else's legacy? I thought it would be different for you, she whispered. I thought you'd be the exception, but I wasn't. And in that moment, I realized I never would be. I'm done, I said with sudden clarity. I'm not spending another decade trying to earn a place at a table they've already decided I don't deserve. Rebecca stood up, alarm flashing across her face. What are you saying? I'm saying I quit, effective immediately. You can't just quit. The family has made it perfectly clear where I stand, I interrupted. And it's not in the inner circle, no matter what I achieve. The next morning, I walked into Walter's office and placed my resignation letter on his immaculate desk. He read it without expression, then set it down carefully, aligning it with the edge of his desk. This is rather dramatic, don't you think? He said finally. One setback, and you're ready to throw away a promising career. It's not about the trust, I lied. I've been offered an opportunity I can't refuse. This wasn't true yet, but it would be. I'd been fielding recruitment calls for years, calls I'd loyally reported to Walter, calls I'd declined out of family obligation. Family. The word tasted bitter now. With whom? Walter's eyes narrowed. The real estate world in Boston was small. Competitors were also colleagues, often friends. I'm moving into tech investment, different industry altogether. Relief softened his features slightly. Not a competitor, then. Not a threat. Rebecca is on board with this. Impulsive decision? The question carried layers of implication. Was my wife choosing me or her family? Was I forcing her hand? Was I disrupting the dynasty? Rebecca and I will discuss our future tonight, I said carefully. But my decision about Harrison Enterprises is final. Walter stood, extending his hand across the desk. Always the businessman, even now. We'll have legal draft the necessary. Separation agreements. Your contribution has been valued, Ethan. Valued but not rewarded. Appreciated but not respected. As I shook his hand, I made a silent vow that this wouldn't be the last business transaction between us. The conversation with Rebecca that night was the hardest of our marriage. They'll see this as betrayal, she said, pacing our bedroom as I packed a suitcase. Dad, especially. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's rich, considering what happened yesterday. I know, but walking out like this? She gestured at my half-filled suitcase. Where are you even going? Denver, I said, folding a shirt with precision. An old classmate from Wharton has been trying to recruit me to his tech venture for years, Summit Innovations. They're doing incredible things with property technology, the exact digital transformation I tried to get your father to invest in. Denver? Rebecca's voice rose. That's not a weekend cooling-off trip, Ethan. That's leaving. I stopped packing and really looked at her, this woman I loved, caught between loyalty to her husband and the golden chains of her inheritance. I'm not asking you to choose right now, I said gently. I need space to figure out my next move without Harrison Enterprises looming over every decision. Come with me, or stay and take some time to think. But I can't spend another day working. For a family that sees me as an employee with a convenient marital attachment to the daughter. Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed. How long will you be gone? I don't know, I answered honestly. However long it takes to build something, that's mine, something no one can exclude me from. 2 days later, I was on a flight to Denver with 2 suitcases and a burning determination that had replaced the hollow ache of betrayal. As the plane lifted above Boston Harbor, I watched the city shrink beneath me, the skyline dotted with buildings bearing the Harrison name, monuments to a legacy I'd helped build but would never share. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. I love you. I need time. Please understand. I did understand. The Harrison golden handcuffs weren't easily removed, and Rebecca had worn them her entire life. Denver greeted me with clear mountain, air, and possibility. Marcus Wong, my former classmate, met me at the airport with a firm handshake and genuine enthusiasm. The prodigal son escapes the family business, he joked as we loaded my bags into his Tesla. Took you long enough to accept my offer. Sometimes you need a push to make the leap, I replied, not ready to share the full story yet. Summit Innovations occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building with views of the Rockies. Unlike the wood-paneled, old-money aesthetic of Harrison Enterprises, this space hummed with energy. Open floor plans, collaboration areas, and people who looked excited to be there. We're revolutionizing how commercial real estate functions, Marcus explained, leading me through the office. AI-driven property valuation, blockchain for transparent transactions, VR tours that eliminate travel for international investors. All the things dinosaur firms like Harrison reject because they're comfortable with their market dominance. I smiled at the unintentional jab. You've been keeping tabs on my former employer? On all the major players, Marcus shrugged. But I've been waiting for you specifically. No one understands both traditional real estate and financial innovation like you do. He showed me to a temporary office with my name already on the YAO. Dorian, Senior Investment Strategist, I read aloud. For now, Marcus winked. Prove what you can do, and titles change quickly around here. That night, in a sterile extended-stay hotel room, I called Rebecca. The conversation was strained, filled with careful questions about weather and accommodations rather than the gaping hole in our relationship. Daniel and Natalie haven't stopped talking about you leaving, she finally admitted. Dad's furious but pretending he's not. He keeps saying you'll come to your senses once you realize how good you had it. And what do you think? I asked. A long pause. I think you deserved better than what happened. But I also think running across the country seems extreme. I'm not running away, I corrected. I'm running toward something new. Without me, she added softly. The door is open whenever you want to walk through it, I reminded her. I'm building a life here, Rebecca. One where I'm valued for my contributions, not tolerated because I married well. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began what would become my nightly ritual, tracking Harrison Enterprises. I set up alerts for their properties, their financial filings, their press releases. Not out of nostalgia, but strategy. Walter had taught me to always know the competition, to find leverage where others saw nothing. I just never expected to apply those lessons against him. The first few months at Summit were a revelation. Ideas that Walter had dismissed as unnecessary innovation were welcomed here. My experience navigating Boston's complex real estate landscape brought valuable perspective to a team focused on disrupting the very industry that had shaped me. I worked long hours, but for the first time, it was on my terms. My temporary apartment gave way to a modern loft downtown. Weekend calls with Rebecca became less frequent, more formal, as if we were both acknowledging the growing distance without naming it. Dad's been asking if you've gotten it out of your system yet, she mentioned during one call, 6 months into my new life. And what did you tell him? I asked, looking out at the mountain view from my new balcony. That he doesn't understand. What he lost, she said quietly. None of them do. A week later, Rebecca visited Denver. Seeing her in my new context, away from Harrison influence, felt like meeting a different person. She laughed more easily, expressed opinions I'd never heard before, seemed lighter somehow. You seem happy here, she observed as we hiked in the foothills one morning. I am, I admitted. I'm building something meaningful, something mine. On her last night, over dinner at my favorite local restaurant, Rebecca set down her wine glass with unusual determination. I want to try, she said. Us. Here. Away from my family's shadow. Hope bloomed in my chest. Are you serious? I took a leave of absence from Harrison Enterprises, she revealed. 3 months to start. I told Dad I needed to work on my marriage. He wasn't happy, but even he knows better than to openly oppose that. 2 weeks later, Rebecca moved into my Denver loft, bringing 3 times as many suitcases as I had and a cautious optimism that warmed our home. She found a position with a local real estate marketing firm, refusing my offer to connect her with Summit, and slowly, we began rebuilding what the Harrisons had fractured. A year after my abrupt departure from Boston, Marcus called me into his office. We're making waves, he said, sliding a tablet across his desk. On the screen was a financial news article. Summit Innovations disrupts East Coast markets with revolutionary property tech. I scrolled through the article, stopping at a familiar name, Harrison Enterprises. Their quarterly earnings dropped. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus pointed out. And our valuation just hit 9 figures. Your strategy of targeting their undervalued properties with our international investor network has been brilliant. Just business, I said, though satisfaction warmed my chest. Marcus leaned forward. I'm promoting you to Chief Strategy Officer and offering you equity in the company. Equity, a stake, a place at the table that no one could revoke based on family politics. That night, I shared the news with Rebecca over champagne on our balcony. You did it, she said, genuine pride in her eyes. You built something they can't ignore. We're just getting started, I replied, thinking of the alerts that had been coming in with increasing frequency. Harrison Enterprises shifting strategies, selling properties they would normally hold, making uncharacteristically reactive moves. Rebecca's phone buzzed. Her expression darkened as she read the message. What is it? I asked. Dad, she sighed, the annual strategy retreat at the lake house is next month. He's strongly suggesting I return for it, alone. The Harrison family retreat was legendary in Boston business circles. Each year, Walter gathered the family at their New Hampshire lake property to set the course for the coming year. Deals were made, alliances formed, and family members who missed it did so at their peril. "Are you going?" I asked carefully. Rebecca stared at the mountains, twilight painting them purple and gold. "I think I have to. There's something in his message. It feels urgent." "Then go," I said, making a decision. "In fact, I think it's time I had a conversation with your father myself." Rebecca looked alarmed. "You're not coming to the retreat?" "No," I assured her. "But afterward, I think Walter Harrison and I need to clear the air." 2 days after Rebecca departed for the family retreat, my phone exploded with notifications. Harrison Enterprises stock had dropped 7% overnight following rumors of liquidity problems. Properties that had been in the Harrison portfolio for generations were suddenly on the market. What I'd suspected for months was now playing out in public. The Harrison empire was crumbling. I booked a flight to Boston. "You shouldn't have come," Rebecca hissed when I met her at a coffee shop near their Brookline estate. "Dad will see this as vultures circling." "I'm not here as a vulture," I said. "I'm here as your husband, and someone who still cares about this family despite everything." "They're selling the legacy properties," she confirmed, voice low. "The Marlborough Street buildings, the Beacon Hill row houses, even the Cape Cod compound is quietly on the market. Dad overextended on some developments that went south. The trust is bleeding cash. And let me guess, Walter's keeping it quiet from the extended family?" Rebecca nodded miserably. "Only Daniel, Natalie, and I know the full picture. Dad's going to handle it himself, like always." I reached across the table and took her hand. There might be a way to save the core of the business. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Summit is looking to establish an East Coast headquarters. We need the right properties and the right local expertise." Understanding dawned on her face. "You want to acquire Harrison Enterprises?" "Not all of it," I clarified. "Just the key historical properties that form the foundation of the portfolio. The ones with actual value rather than just sentimental attachment. Summit would provide the technology, integration, and international investment that Walter has always resisted. The Harrison name stays. The legacy continues. Just evolved." Rebecca pulled her hand away. "And you'd be the conquering hero, riding in to save the day." "I'd be a businessman proposing a mutually beneficial solution," I corrected. "Your father gets liquidity and saves face. The family keeps its name on the buildings. Summit expands its footprint. Everyone wins. Except you become the person who controls the empire that excluded you," she pointed out. I smiled. "Ironic, isn't it?" Walter refused to see me for 3 days. When he finally agreed to a meeting, he chose neutral territory, the Bar of the Four Seasons, where Boston's business deals had been quietly negotiated for decades. He looked older than when I'd left, the strain of financial pressure etching new lines around his eyes. Victoria was noticeably absent. This was business, not family. Not that the Harrisons had ever truly separated the two. "Rebecca says you have a proposition," he said without preamble, signaling the bartender for his usual scotch. I placed a slim folder on the bar between us. "Summit Innovations wishes to acquire a controlling interest in specific Harrison properties. The terms are outlined here." Walter didn't touch the folder. "You've done well for yourself in Colorado?" "Yes." "And now you've come to—" "What? Gloat? Take revenge? Buy up the pieces of my company while it's vulnerable?" I met his gaze steadily. "I've come to offer a partnership that saves the Harrison legacy while bringing it into the modern era. Something I tried to do from the inside for 5 years." He finally opened the folder, scanning the terms with the shrewd eye that had built his fortune. I watched his expression shift from suspicion to surprise to reluctant respect. "This valuation is generous," he admitted finally. "The Harrison name still means something in Boston," I replied, "and Summit values what works. Your old school relationship network combined with our technological innovation could transform the market." Walter signaled for another scotch. "And your role in this arrangement?" "I would oversee the East Coast division, including all former Harrison properties. The family remains involved, but with Summit's resources and direction. My children? Retain their positions if they choose, with opportunities to advance based on merit." Walter almost smiled at that. And the trust? Here it was, the heart of everything. "Remains intact, with modifications to include all contributing family members by marriage or by blood. Equal stakes, equal say." He studied me with new eyes. "This isn't about revenge." "No," I agreed. "It's about building something better than either of us could alone. I learned that from you, actually, before I learned the less admirable lessons." 3 weeks of intensive negotiations followed. Daniel opposed the deal initially, seeing it as surrender. Natalie, always the pragmatist, recognized the lifeline it represented. Rebecca mediated between her siblings and her husband, finding her voice in the process. Victoria remained coldly civil, but I caught her studying the Summit property technology demonstrations with grudging fascination. On a crisp fall morning, in the Harrison Enterprises boardroom where I'd discovered my exclusion from the family trust, Walter Harrison signed the acquisition papers that transformed his dynasty forever. As the family members added their signatures, one by one, I noticed Walter watching me. "You could have pushed for more," he said quietly. "We were in no position to negotiate." "That would have been short-sighted," I replied. "This way, we all have skin in the game. Everyone contributes. Everyone benefits." After the lawyers departed, Walter did something unprecedented. He poured champagne for everyone present, including me. "To new beginnings," he offered as a toast. The family echoed his words, the tension of the past months slowly dissolving into cautious optimism. Later, as Rebecca and I prepared to return to Denver, temporarily, as we'd now be splitting our time between both cities, she took my hand. "You didn't do it to prove them wrong," she realized. "You did it to prove yourself right." I smiled, thinking of the new trust agreement sitting in our briefcase, with my name finally listed among the Harrison family beneficiaries. Not because I'd married in, but because I'd earned my place. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge. At all, I told her. It's building something so undeniable that everyone rises with you. As our plane lifted above Boston Harbor, I watched the skyline, dotted with buildings that now represented not just the Harrison legacy, but my own. The empire that had excluded me had become the foundation for something greater, something that would benefit generations to come. Not because I'd torn it down in anger, but because I'd transformed it with purpose. Walter had built his dynasty on the principle that family comes first. He'd just never understood that family isn't defined by blood or last names. It's defined by contribution, by commitment, by shared vision. Now he did, and so did I. Denver in January was nothing like Boston. The air was crisp and dry, the sun brilliant against the snow-capped mountains that served as a constant backdrop to my new reality. My extended stay hotel room felt both liberating and hollow, a blank canvas waiting for a life I hadn't yet figured out how to build. I'd been in Colorado for exactly 1 week, and the novelty of escape was beginning to wear off. The initial surge of righteousness that had carried me across the country was fading, replaced by the sobering realization that I'd walked away from a 5-year career, a beautiful home, and a marriage that now hung in a precarious balance. The Harrison portfolio review would have been today, I muttered to myself, staring out the window at the unfamiliar skyline. Old habits died hard. For 5 years, I'd structured my life around the Harrison Enterprises calendar. Quarterly reviews, annual projections, development timelines. Now I answered to no one but myself, and the freedom felt strangely paralyzing. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner tonight? 7 p.m. Time to stop hiding in that hotel and join the land of the living." I smiled despite myself. Marcus Wong had always possessed an uncanny ability to read people, even back at Wharton. While other classmates had been intimidated by the intensity of the program, Marcus had thrived, finding opportunities where others saw only pressure. Now he was doing the same for me, refusing to let me marinate in self-pity. Summit Innovations occupied the 15th through 17th floors of a glass tower downtown. Unlike the Harrison offices, with their mahogany paneling and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, Summit was all light and transparency, open workspaces, glass conference rooms, and not a private office in sight. Even Marcus, as founder and CEO, worked from a desk in the center of the main floor. "The new financial strategist graces us with his presence," he announced as I stepped off the elevator that first Monday morning. Heads turned, curious eyes evaluating the East Coast. Transplant. "Senior financial strategist," I corrected with a smile, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "For now," Marcus winked, leading me through the space. "Come meet the team who'll be relying on your supposed genius." The Summit team was younger, more diverse, and significantly more casual than anyone I'd worked with at Harrison Enterprises. Developers in hoodies sat alongside analysts with purple hair. Conference rooms were named after sci-fi references rather than prestigious addresses or family patriarchs. Jessica Patel, head of product development, greeted me with a firm handshake and direct gaze. "So you're the Boston real estate whiz Marcus wouldn't shut up about. We've been trying to crack the East Coast market for 2 years. What makes you think you can help us do it?" No polite small talk, no deferential respect for the boss's friend. Just a direct challenge that required immediate proof of value. "Because I know exactly why traditional firms like Harrison are vulnerable," replied. "They're sitting on underutilized assets, refusing to adopt technologies that would maximize their portfolio values, and alienating the next generation of investors with outdated practices." Jessica raised an eyebrow, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. "Sounds personal." "The best business insights usually are," I countered. By lunchtime, I was drowning in documentation, platform specifications, user research, investment models, all brilliant in concept, but lacking the real-world application that came from actually owning and managing properties. This was where I could add immediate value, translating Summit's technological innovation into language that would resonate with traditional real estate investors. That night, over craft beers at a downtown gastropub, Marcus finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "So what really happened with the Harrisons? You don't walk away from a fast-track position in a family dynasty for no reason." I took a long pull from my beer, organizing my thoughts. They made it clear I wasn't family, just an employee with convenient marital attachments. After 5 years of killing myself to prove my worth, I discovered I was specifically excluded from their family trust, the mechanism that controls everything in their world. Marcus winced. "Damn, that's cold." The coldest part was that Rebecca knew, or at least suspected, and never warned me. She let me pour my life into building their legacy while knowing I'd never truly share in it. And now? I shrugged. Now I start over. Build something that's actually mine. Marcus studied me thoughtfully. "Revenge is a powerful motivator, but a shitty foundation. Trust me, I've been there." "It's not about revenge," I insisted, though the knot in my stomach suggested otherwise. "Sure it's not," Marcus grinned. Just like Summit wasn't about proving wrong every venture capitalist who said a first-generation immigrant couldn't disrupt the property tech space. My first month at Summit passed in a blur of learning curves and late nights. I immersed myself in understanding their technology platform, AI valuation models, blockchain transaction tracking, virtual reality property tours. The innovations were genuinely revolutionary, making Harrison Enterprises' approach look like it belonged in the previous century. My temporary hotel suite gave way to a sparsely furnished month-to-month apartment rental. I owned exactly 4 plates, 2 pots, and whatever clothes I'd managed to pack in my hasty departure. The minimalism felt appropriate. I was stripping my life down to its essentials, rebuilding from the foundation up. Rebecca and I spoke every few days, our conversations careful and measured. She never directly mentioned her parents or the trust, focusing instead on neutral topics, the weather, mutual friends, benign updates about her work. It was as if we were both circling the wreckage of what had happened, unsure how to begin clearing the debris. "The boardroom feels empty without you," she admitted during one late-night call. "Dad brought in some Harvard MBA to replace you, and he's not you." "No one could be me," I replied, aiming for lightness, but hearing the bitterness creep in. I was the one person willing to work 60-hour weeks for a family that would never consider me one of them. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. "They miss you," she finally said, "even if they won't admit it." "Do you miss me?" I asked instead. Her voice softened. "Every day. Our home feels too big now, too quiet." "It was never our home," I reminded her gently. "It was a Harrison property, purchased with Harrison money in a Harrison-approved neighborhood." "That's not fair," she protested. "Isn't it? When was the last time we made a major life decision without considering how your family would react? Where we lived, where we vacationed, even what charity galas we attended. Everything revolved around the Harrison orbit." 6 weeks into my new position, I presented my first major strategy proposal to the Summit leadership team. The conference room fell silent as I outlined a targeted approach to breaking into the East Coast market, not by competing directly with established firms like Harrison Enterprises, but by partnering with mid-sized developers hungry for technological advantages. "The old guard is vulnerable," I explained, displaying heat maps of property valuations across Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. "They're overextended in legacy holdings and underinvested in emerging neighborhoods. With our valuation AI, we can identify properties they're undervaluing by up to 30%. Jessica leaned forward. "And you know this how?" "Because I created the valuation models for Harrison Enterprises," I replied. "Models that deliberately undervalue properties that don't fit their traditional aesthetic or location preferences. It creates blind spots we can exploit." Marcus grinned. "This is exactly why I've been trying to hire you for years." The strategy was approved unanimously. Within days, I was orchestrating Summit's first East Coast property acquisitions, strategic purchases in neighborhoods the Harrisons and their peers had dismissed as unworthy of their portfolios. Each successful transaction felt like a small victory, a step further away from the shadow of my former life. 2 months into my time in Denver, I finally found a permanent apartment, a modern loft in a converted factory building with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the mountain view. The space was nothing like the traditional Beacon Hill brownstone I'd shared with Rebecca. It was unabashedly contemporary, industrial, mine. As I unpacked my meager belongings, my phone rang with a Boston area code I didn't recognize. "Ethan Mitchell," I answered, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder as I assembled a bookshelf. "It's Daniel Harrison, Rebecca's brother, the dutiful son who'd abandoned his culinary dreams to join the family business. We had always maintained a cordial but distant relationship, both of us too aware of our competitive positions in Walter's estimation. "Daniel, this is unexpected." "Yeah, well, He cleared his throat. Things are unexpected here, too. Dad's pissed if you're wondering. Doesn't mention your name, which means he's thinking about you constantly. I set down my screwdriver. I didn't leave to hurt your father. Didn't you? The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Because from where I'm sitting, you abandoned my sister and walked away from responsibilities you committed to. The Harrisons made it very clear which commitments actually mattered, I replied. The family trust was quite illuminating on that front. Daniel sighed, and I could picture him running a hand through his hair, a gesture he and Rebecca shared when frustrated. Look, I didn't call to fight about the trust. I called because I'm worried about Becca. She's not herself. Goes through the motions at work, barely speaks at family dinners. Mom thinks she should just divorce you and move on, but what? But I've never seen my sister love anyone the way she loves you. And I'm not sure the Harrison way of handling. This is the right way. I sank onto my still-boxed mattress. What are you suggesting? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe that there's a middle ground somewhere? That throwing away 5 years of marriage over family politics seems crazy even by our dysfunctional standards? After we hung up, I stood at my new windows, watching the sun set behind the mountains, casting everything in gold. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to really feel the Rebecca-shaped hole in my life. Not just the absence of her physical presence, but the loss of our shared future, the dreams we'd built together. That night, I sent her a text. I'd been drafting and deleting for weeks. The door is always open, for a visit, for a conversation, for whatever you need. I miss you. Her reply came hours later when I was almost asleep. I miss you too, more than I can say in a text. 3 days later, Jessica dropped into the chair across from my desk, startling me from a financial model I'd been fine-tuning. You've been here almost 3 months and still barely know anyone's name, she observed. The engineering team has a betting pool on whether you're secretly a robot. I looked up from my screen. I know people's names. My assistant's name? Tyler? Tristan, she corrected. And he's been bringing you coffee every morning since you started. I winced. At Harrison Enterprises, knowing the support staff had been Walter's measuring stick for character. He claimed you could tell everything about a person by how they treated those without power. Here I was, failing that basic test. Point taken, I acknowledged. I've been focused. Obsessed is the word most people use, Jessica said bluntly. Look, your strategy is brilliant. The acquisitions are exceeding projections. But Summit isn't just about the work, it's about the people. We're going out tonight, the core team. You're coming. It wasn't a request. That evening, at a hole-in-the-wall taco place with the best mezcal selection in Denver, I found myself surrounded by Summit colleagues who were quickly becoming friends. The conversation flowed easily from work projects to personal stories, with none of the careful status positioning that had characterized Harrison's social events. So the Boston real estate prodigy can actually smile, Jessica teased, sliding another drink in front of me. Who knew? I smile, I protested. At spreadsheets, maybe, she countered. Not at people. Through the pleasant haze of good food and better tequila, I found myself sharing more than I'd intended. Not just about the Harrison Trust betrayal, but about the 5 years leading up to it. How I'd gradually surrendered pieces of myself to fit into their world. How even my relationship with Rebecca had been shaped by Harrison expectations. Sounds like a cult, one of the developers observed. An exclusive, very wealthy cult. I agreed with a laugh that surprised me with its lack of bitterness. Jessica studied me over the rim of her glass. So what happens now? With your wife? With all of it? I traced patterns in the condensation, on the table. I don't know. I'm building something new here, finding out who I am without the Harrison shadow. Rebecca has to decide if she wants to be part of that, or if she's too tied to her family's expectations. And if she chooses her family? Jessica pressed. Then I'll have my answer, I replied simply. The night ended with promises of future, outings, and the warm glow of belonging, something I hadn't felt since my earliest days at Harrison Enterprises, before I'd understood the limitations of my position. For the first time since arriving in Denver, I felt not just professionally engaged, but personally connected. The next morning, slightly hungover, but surprisingly refreshed, I dove back into work with renewed focus. My East Coast strategy was beginning to show measurable results. 3 mid-sized development firms had signed on to use Summit's technology platform, and property acquisitions in Boston's emerging neighborhoods were already showing value increases that validated our AI models. I was in the middle of a conference call when my phone lit up with Rebecca's name. I gestured an apology to my colleagues and stepped out to take the call. "Can you talk?" Her voice sounded strained. "I'm in a meeting, but I can step away." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly." She hesitated. "I've been thinking about everything. About us. About the past few months. I need to see you, Ethan. To talk face to face." My pulse quickened. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'm at Denver International Airport, and I need your address." 4 hours later, Rebecca stood in my loft, taking in the space with curious eyes. She looked both familiar and strange, the woman I'd woken up beside for 5 years, yet somehow transformed by our separation. Her Harrison-approved pearls were absent, replaced by a simple silver pendant I'd never seen. Her hair was shorter, less structured. "This is not what I expected," she said, running a hand along the exposed brick wall. "What were you expecting?" "Something temporary. A place you were staying until you came back to Boston." She turned to face me. "But this isn't temporary, is it? This is a life you're building." "Yes," I admitted. "It is." We talked for hours, circling from surface topics to deeper waters and back again. She told me about the changes at Harrison. Enterprises, new projects, shifting dynamics, her father's increasing irritability. I shared stories about Summit, my growing friendship with the team, the liberation of working somewhere my ideas were valued on merit rather than family connection. Neither of us mentioned the trust directly, but its shadow lingered in every careful pause, every unfinished thought. As night fell, casting the loft in silver moonlight, Rebecca finally asked the question we'd been avoiding. "Where does this leave us, Ethan? Are we separating? Divorcing? Trying again?" Her voice caught. "Because I've been in limbo for months and I can't do it anymore." I sat beside her on the couch, close but not touching. "What do you want, Rebecca? Not what your parents want, not what you think I want. What do you want?" She looked startled, as if the question itself was revolutionary. "I want—" "Take your time," I encouraged. "This might be the first decision you've made without considering the Harrison approval rating." A flicker of irritation crossed her face, followed by reluctant acknowledgement. "That's not fair, but it's not entirely wrong either." She took a deep breath. "I want us, but I also want my family. I don't think those things should be mutually exclusive." "They're mutually exclusive as long as your family sees me as an employee rather than a member," I pointed out. "As long as the Harrison legacy matters more than our marriage." "Then we change their minds," she said with surprising determination. "Or we define our own terms for what this marriage is, independent of their expectations." "Are you prepared to do that? To set boundaries with Walter and Victoria that you've never set before?" Instead of answering, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded document. "I brought something you should see." I recognized the Harrison family crest embossed on the letterhead, the same crest that adorned everything from their buildings to their letterhead to the cufflinks Walter had given me on my first Harrison Enterprises anniversary. "What is this?" A draft of the revised trust agreement Dad's been working on, she said quietly. He doesn't know I have it. I scanned the document, legal language swimming before my eyes, until I reached the section that had destroyed my faith in the family. The beneficiary list still included all the expected names: Rebecca, Daniel, Natalie, Olivia, but there, added in Walter's distinctive handwriting in the margin, provision to be made for Ethan Mitchell contingent upon 5-year employment. Term. He was going to include me, I murmured, disbelieving, after I completed 5 years. It was always the plan, Rebecca confirmed. That's what I was trying to tell you that day. The Harrison Trust has a tradition. Family by marriage must prove their commitment for 5 years before being included. It's archaic and unfair, but it's how it's always been done. My grandfather made my mother wait. My father made Daniel's wife wait. And no one thought to mention this to me? I looked up, anger flickering anew. I worked for 5 years believing I was building something for us, only to discover I'd been locked out, and your response is, "That's just how it's done?" Rebecca flushed. I should have told you. We all should have. But the trust terms are treated like some sacred text, never to be discussed with outsiders until they've earned inclusion. I was your husband, not an outsider. To my father, everyone's an outsider until proven otherwise, she said sadly. It took my mother 7 years to be fully included. Olivia was fast-tracked because of her family connections. I thought... She hesitated. I thought you'd be the exception. That your contributions were so valuable, Dad would waive the waiting period. I set the document down, emotions warring within me. On one hand, the knowledge that Walter had intended to include me eventually softened the betrayal slightly. On the other, the paternalistic, secretive approach to what should have been transparent family business only reinforced my decision to leave. So what now? I asked. You've shown me this to convince me to come back? To wait out the remaining term like a good soldier? Rebecca shook her head. I showed you this because you deserve the truth. What happens now is up to us. She reached for my hand. I've taken a 3-month leave of absence from Harrison Enterprises. I told my father I needed time to evaluate my priorities. And what did Walter say to that? A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. He said it was the most Harrison thing I've ever done, making a strategic retreat to assess the situation. Despite myself, I laughed. It was such a Walter response, reframing his daughter's emotional crisis as a tactical business decision. 3 months, I repeated. Here in Denver? If you'll have me, she replied, vulnerability evident in her voice. Not to pressure you into returning to Boston, but to see if we can rebuild what we had, or build something new, without the Harrison shadow looming over every decision. I looked around the loft, my space, created in my vision without a single Harrison influence, and tried to imagine Rebecca in it. Not as a visitor, but as a partner in this new life I was constructing. It won't be easy, I warned. I'm not the same person who left Boston. Good, she said firmly. Neither am I. That night, Rebecca slept in my bed while I took the couch, both of us acknowledging that physical intimacy would complicate an already complex situation. In the morning, I showed her Summit Innovations, introducing her to Marcus and the team with a mix of pride and uncertainty. She charmed them effortlessly, the social skills honed through years of Harrison galas and business functions serving her well in this new context. She's not what I expected, Jessica commented later, after Rebecca had left to explore downtown. From how you described the Harrisons, I pictured someone more entitled, cold, calculating, I supplied. Constrained, Jessica decided. She seems like she's discovering who she is, just like you are. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca and I established a cautious routine. She found a short-term position with a local real estate marketing firm, deliberately choosing work unconnected to Summit or Harrison interests. We explored Denver together on weekends, hiking in the foothills and discovering neighborhoods neither of us would have visited in our previous life. Slowly, we began to reconnect, not as the power couple we'd all been in Boston, defined by our roles in the Harrison universe, but as two people rediscovering each other outside those constraints. "I never knew you liked jazz," Rebecca remarked one night as we left a small club downtown. In 5 years of marriage, how did I not know that? I considered this. Because in Boston, we only attended events that served Harrison interests: charity, galas, symphony fundraisers, art auctions. We never just went out for the sake of enjoyment. She was quiet for a moment. "What else don't I know about you?" It was a profound question, one that led to late-night conversations about dreams deferred, interests suppressed, and the subtle ways we'd both molded ourselves to fit Harrison expectations. 4 months after my abrupt departure from Boston, Marcus called me into a meeting with the executive team. Summit's valuation had doubled since implementing my East Coast strategy. Properties we'd acquired in Boston's emerging neighborhoods were showing returns that exceeded even our optimistic projections. "We're making waves in markets that haven't seen innovation in decades," Marcus announced, sliding a tablet across the conference table. The screen displayed a financial news article highlighting Summit's disruptive impact on traditional real estate models. I scrolled through, stopping cold at a familiar name: Harrison Enterprises. Their quarterly earnings dropped for the first time in 15 years, Marcus pointed out, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. "Your strategy of targeting their undervalued properties has been brilliant." A complex emotion surged through me, part vindication, part concern for the family that, despite everything, still meant something to me. For Rebecca, who was building a life with me in Denver, while her family's legacy showed the first cracks in its foundation. "This isn't about targeting Harrison specifically," I clarified, as much for myself as for the team. "It's about demonstrating the value of our approach, compared to outdated models." "Of course," Marcus agreed, though his smile suggested he understood the personal satisfaction I might take in the situation. "Which is why I'm promoting you to Chief Strategy Officer, effective immediately, with equity in the company." Equity. A stake. Recognition of my value that no one could take away based on family politics or traditions. That evening, I shared the news with Rebecca over dinner at home, my loft gradually transforming into our space, her touches softening the industrial edges, our belongings mingling in a way that felt right. "Chief Strategy Officer," she repeated, raising her wine glass in a toast. "Congratulations, Ethan. You deserve it." "The promotion comes with equity in Summit," I added, watching her reaction carefully. "I'll be a partner, not just an employee." Understanding flickered in her eyes, the contrast to my position at Harrison Enterprises unmistakable. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "You've built something remarkable here." Her phone buzzed, screen lighting up with her father's name. She glanced at it, then deliberately set it face down on the table. "Not going to answer?" I asked. "It can wait," she replied. "Tonight is about celebrating your achievement." But later, as she took the call in the bedroom, I caught fragments of conversation: quarterly numbers, strategy adjustments, unexpected market challenges. Walter Harrison, facing the first significant threat to his business in decades, was reaching out to his daughter for counsel. When she emerged, her expression was troubled. "Everything okay?" I asked. Rebecca sank onto the couch beside me. "Dad's worried. The board is asking questions about the downturn. Some properties they've held for generations are underperforming, against market expectations." "Properties are AI identified as overvalued," I translated. She nodded slowly. "The annual strategy retreat at the lake house is next month. Dad's strongly suggesting I return for it. The Harrison family retreat was legendary in Boston business circles. A week at the family's New Hampshire lakeside compound, where the course was set for the coming year. Deals were made, alliances formed, and family members who missed it did so at their peril. "Are you going to go?" I kept my voice neutral. Rebecca studied her hands. "I think I have to." There's something in Dad's voice I've never heard before. Uncertainty. I took her hand, threading our fingers together. "Then go." She looked up, surprised. "You'd be okay with that? After everything?" "I didn't leave Boston to separate you from your family, Rebecca. I left because I needed to build something that was mine, where my value wasn't determined by someone else's assessment." I squeezed her hand. "Your family needs you. That doesn't threaten what we're building here." Relief softened her features. "Thank you for understanding." As she began making arrangements for her trip back east, I found myself thinking about the Harrison Enterprises quarterly report, about Walter's uncharacteristic uncertainty, about what it might mean for the family that had shaped both our lives so profoundly. 5 years inside the Harrison operation had given me intimate knowledge of their vulnerabilities, the properties they overvalued out of sentiment rather than sound business judgment, the technological innovations they'd dismissed that were now driving Summit's success. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge the complexity of my feelings toward the Harrisons. Not just the hurt and anger that had propelled me across the country, but the genuine respect for what Walter had built, the concern for Rebecca's family legacy, and the lingering sense of unfinished business. As Rebecca packed for Boston, her movements efficient but nervous, I made a decision. "After your family retreat," I said, "I think it's time I had a conversation with your father." Her hands stilled over her suitcase. "What kind of conversation?" I looked out at the Denver skyline, the mountains beyond, the new life we were carefully constructing. One that addresses the past and looks toward the future, on equal terms this time. Rebecca studied me, searching for signs of the vengeful anger that had driven my departure months ago. Instead, she found something different. The steady confidence of a man who had proven his worth to himself and was ready to engage from a position of strength rather than resentment. "He might not be ready to hear what you have to say," she warned. "Maybe not," I acknowledged. "But I think circumstances might make him more receptive than he would have been before." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me, resting her head against my chest. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Whatever happens with my family, with the business, with all of it, remember that we found something real. Here, something that belongs to us, not to the Harrison legacy." I pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "That's the one thing I'm absolutely certain of." As Rebecca departed for Boston the next morning, I turned my attention to Summit's growing portfolio, particularly the properties we'd acquired in direct competition with Harrison Holdings. With each successful acquisition, each technological innovation that outpaced traditional models, we weren't just building Summit's future. We were creating leverage for a conversation that could either heal old wounds or deepen them beyond repair. The choice, I realized, would ultimately depend not on Walter Harrison's stubbornness or my own pride, but on whether both of us could recognize that sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't what you build alone, but what you create by bringing together different strengths. I smiled as I reviewed Summit's latest valuation models. Walter Harrison had spent a lifetime teaching me about leverage in real estate acquisitions. It was time to show him how well I'd learned that lesson, just not in the way he had expected. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Summit Innovations office, bathing the space in golden light. 6 months had passed since I'd walked away from Harrison Enterprises. 6 months of rebuilding and reinventing myself in Denver's vibrant business landscape. What had begun as an impulsive escape had transformed into something I hadn't anticipated, Genuine success on my own terms. Quarterly numbers just came in, Jessica announced, leaning against my doorframe with a tablet in hand. Unlike Harrison, Enterprises with its formal meetings and ceremonial presentations, Summit operated on real-time data and casual interactions. East Coast acquisitions are up 38%. The board is thrilled. I smiled, scanning the report she handed me. The properties we'd targeted in Boston's emerging neighborhoods, areas the Harrisons had dismissed as unworthy of their portfolio, were outperforming even our optimistic projections. Our AI valuation models had identified opportunities the old guard firms had systematically overlooked, whether from outdated methodologies or simple arrogance. The Dorchester properties are particularly strong, I noted, zooming in on a cluster of mixed-use developments we'd acquired. Rental yields are exceeding market averages by 22%. Jessica's eyes glinted with satisfaction. Not bad for someone who was supposed to be just a Boston real estate dinosaur's son-in-law. The comment might have stung months ago, but now I found myself chuckling. The identity I'd fought so hard to establish at Harrison Enterprises, the dedicated son-in-law, the loyal soldier, the family-adjacent executive, felt increasingly distant, like a role I'd played in someone else's production. Marcus wants to see you, Jessica added as she turned to leave. Something about expanding your strategy to New York and Philadelphia. Marcus's corner office, really just a slightly larger desk area with a view of the mountains, was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Unlike Walter Harrison, who operated from behind closed doors and layers of administrative gatekeepers, Marcus conducted business in full view of the team, believing transparency fostered innovation. There he is, Marcus grinned, waving me over. The man who's making Boston's old money sweat. I took a seat at his cluster of modernist furniture, noting the financial projections displayed on his multiple screens. Jessica mentioned New York and Philadelphia? Phase 2, Marcus nodded. The board reviewed your East Coast strategy yesterday. They want to accelerate the timeline, double the investment. Your approach in Boston has proven the concept. Disrupting stagnant markets with targeted technology integration. Now we replicate across the entire Northeast corridor. I studied the proposed expansion, mind racing with possibilities. We'll need to adjust our targeting algorithms for each market. New York's real estate dynamics are fundamentally different from Boston's. More international influence, different regulatory considerations. Already factored in, Marcus replied, swiping to a detailed market analysis. The team spent the weekend adapting the models. This is happening, Ethan. We're not just making a dent anymore. We're reshaping how legacy real estate operations function on the East Coast. The implied target wasn't lost on me. Harrison Enterprises, along with its handful of peer firms, had dominated Boston's commercial real estate for generations through a combination of capital reserves, political connections, and family alliances. They'd never faced a truly disruptive competitor until now. There's something else, Marcus said, lowering his voice slightly. The board was impressed enough with your results that they've approved a new position, Chief Strategy Officer. The role reports directly to me and comes with a significant equity stake. I blinked, processing the implications. At Harrison Enterprises, I'd spent 5 years climbing the organizational ladder, always aware that certain positions remained reserved for family members regardless of merit. Here, after just 6 months, I was being offered both a C-suite title and ownership shares. This isn't charity, Marcus added, correctly reading my expression. Your East Coast strategy has added $90 million to our valuation since implementation. The equity is less than you've already earned us. That evening, as Denver's skyline transformed from gold to purple in the fading light, I stood on my loft balcony with a glass of whiskey, contemplating how thoroughly my life had changed in half a year. The promotion would make official what had been increasingly clear. There was no going back to Boston, to Harrison Enterprises, to the life I'd abandoned. My phone buzzed with Rebecca's nightly check-in. Since returning to Boston 3 weeks earlier, she'd maintained our connection. Through daily calls and texts, carefully navigating the complex terrain between her husband and her family. "Congratulations, CSO Mitchell," she said when I answered. Her voice warmed despite the digital distance between us. Marcus called Dad to gloat. I nearly choked on my whiskey. "He did what?" "Apparently they were at Stanford together," Rebecca explained. "Rivals since business school." Marcus couldn't resist sharing the news that he'd not only poached Walter Harrison's son-in-law, but was now making him an executive partner. "How did Walter take it?" I asked, trying to picture my former father-in-law's reaction. "Outwardly?" "Icy congratulations and a quick subject change. Privately?" He shattered a crystal tumbler in his study. "Natalie heard the whole thing." I winced imagining the scene. Walter Harrison prided himself on emotional control, on never revealing weakness or uncertainty. That he'd lost his composure spoke volumes about his mental state. "How are things there otherwise?" I asked, deliberately shifting the subject. "The family retreat is next week, right?" Rebecca sighed, the sound traveling across state lines. "Everything's intense. The quarterly numbers are the worst in 15 years. Dad's keeping it quiet from the extended family, but Daniel, Natalie, and I know the truth. The board is asking uncomfortable questions about leadership succession planning." "Succession planning," I repeated, surprised. "Walter's only 62. He's always said he'd work until he was 80, like his father." "That was before Summit started picking off our undervalued assets in Dorchester and Roxbury," Rebecca replied. "Before our supposedly safe investment strategy started showing cracks. The board wants fresh thinking, and Dad's resistant to change. You know this better than anyone." I thought of all the technological innovations I'd proposed during my tenure at Harrison Enterprises: AI valuation models, blockchain for transaction transparency, virtual property tours, all rejected by Walter as unnecessary extravagances. The same technologies Summit was now using to outmaneuver traditional firms like Harrison. "What does this mean for the family retreat?" I asked. "Dad's framing it as a strategy realignment," Rebecca said. "But it's damage control. He's trying to present a unified front to the board, show that the family is aligned behind his leadership." After we hung up, I found myself opening my laptop, navigating to the Harrison Enterprises Investor Relations page. The quarterly report confirmed what Rebecca had described. Revenue down 11% year-over-year, occupancy rates in key properties falling below market averages, development, projects facing delays and cost overruns. I set up a series of alerts for Harrison news, stock movements, and property listings. Not out of schadenfreude, but from a growing sense that the collision course between Summit and Harrison was accelerating, with potential consequences for both my professional and personal lives. The week passed in a flurry of preparation for my new role. I assembled a team to expand our East Coast strategy, hired specialists with deep knowledge of New York and Philadelphia real estate markets, and refined our acquisition targeting algorithms. Each day brought new opportunities, new challenges, new validation that I'd made the right choice in leaving Boston. Yet thoughts of the Harrisons persisted, intensifying as their family retreat approached. I'd attended the previous 4 annual gatherings at the New Hampshire Lake House, always as Rebecca's husband, always conscious of my outsider status despite Walter's public acknowledgement of my contributions. The retreat combined business strategy with family tradition, setting the course for Harrison Enterprises while reinforcing the dynasty's continuity. This year, for the first time, those discussions would happen without me, and in the shadow of unprecedented business challenges. 2 days after the retreat began, Rebecca called well past midnight, her voice tight with tension. "Everything okay?" I asked, immediately alert despite the late hour. "No," she replied bluntly. Dad dropped a bombshell tonight. They're selling properties, cornerstone holdings that have been in the portfolio for generations. The Marlborough Street commercial block, the Beacon Hill row houses, even portions of the Cape Cod compound. I sat up in bed, processing the implications. That's unprecedented. Those properties are the foundation of the Harrison legacy. It gets worse, Rebecca continued. The trust is bleeding cash. Dad overextended on development projects in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Both are failing. He's been covering losses from reserve funds, but it's not sustainable. Who knows about this? I asked, already calculating potential market impacts if news of Harrison Enterprises' financial troubles became public. Just the immediate family, Daniel, Natalie, and me. Dad's determined to handle it himself, keep it contained. He's meeting with potential buyers next week for the Marlborough Street properties. A memory surfaced, Walter, standing in his office. 3 years earlier, lecturing me about the Harrison commitment to generational asset management. We don't sell cornerstone properties, he'd insisted. We acquire, we improve, we hold. That's how dynasties are built. How's the extended family taking it? I asked, thinking of cousins and in-laws whose financial security was tied to trust, distributions. They don't know yet, Rebecca said, her voice dropping. Dad's presenting everything as strategic repositioning, focusing on growth markets. Only those of us with access to the actual numbers understand how dire the situation is. After we hung up, I returned to my laptop, pulling up Summit's acquisition models. We'd identified several Harrison properties as potentially undervalued, but hadn't targeted their core legacy holdings out of respect for their historical significance. Now those very properties were coming to market, not through strategic choice but financial necessity. The business opportunity was obvious. Summit had the capital and technology to transform these legacy properties, maximizing their value in ways the Harrisons had never explored. Yet I hesitated, aware of how acquiring Harrison cornerstone assets would be perceived not just as a business transaction, but as a personal statement. Morning found me in Marcus's office, outlining the situation. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Harrison Enterprises is quietly liquidating their trophy properties to cover losses, and you want us to consider acquiring them." "They're exceptional assets," I replied, keeping my voice professional. "Landmark locations, strong fundamentals, significant value-add potential through technology integration. The only reason they're underperforming is resistance to modernization." Marcus studied me thoughtfully. "And the fact that these properties represent the heart of your former family's legacy has nothing to do with your interest?" I met his gaze. "I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a personal element. But this is fundamentally a business decision. These properties align perfectly with our expansion strategy." "At what cost, though?" Marcus pressed. "Harrison will demand premium pricing for trophy assets, even in distress. Is this about sound investment or proving something to Walter?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself through a sleepless night. "Both," I admitted finally. "These properties are undervalued even at premium pricing, given what our technology can extract from them. And yes, there's something fitting about Summit revitalizing assets the Harrisons failed to maximize." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll support this on one condition. You need to be the one to negotiate directly with Walter Harrison. If this is partly personal, own that aspect fully. No hiding behind intermediaries or acquisition teams." The prospect of facing Walter across a negotiating table after 6 months of silence sent a jolt of anxiety through me, quickly replaced by resolve. "Agreed. I'll handle it personally." As I returned to my office, my phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. Dad's scheduled meetings with 3 potential buyers next week, positioning the sales as selective portfolio optimization. Everyone sees through it. I typed back, "Summit would be interested in discussing the Marlborough Street properties. would need to meet directly with Walter. Her response came quickly. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I wasn't sure at all, but something told me this collision was inevitable, and perhaps necessary for both personal and professional resolution. 3 days later, my summit team had completed a comprehensive valuation of the Harrison legacy properties coming to market. Our AI models identified significant untapped potential in the Marlborough Street commercial block, potential that traditional valuation methods had missed, and that Walter's resistance to technological integration had left unexplored. "We can justify offering 8% above market," Jessica confirmed, reviewing the final numbers. "The technology implementation alone adds 12 to 15% to the revenue projections." I nodded, studying the detailed analysis. "Schedule the models for presentation, and book me on a flight to Boston for Monday." The decision to return to Boston after 6 months of deliberate distance wasn't made lightly. I could have conducted the negotiation remotely, but something told me this conversation needed to happen face-to-face, not just as a business transaction, but as the closing of one chapter and the potential opening of another. Rebecca met me at Logan Airport, her expression a complex mix of emotions. "This is surreal," she said as we navigated to her car. "You being back but not coming home? It feels strange," I admitted, taking in the familiar Boston skyline as we drove from the airport. So much had changed in 6 months, yet the city remained the same. Historic buildings alongside modern glass towers, the Charles River catching the afternoon light. "Where are you staying?" she asked, carefully casual. "The Four Seasons," I replied. "Neutral territory." She nodded, understanding the unspoken message. This visit wasn't about reconnecting with my old life, but conducting business from a position of independence. "Dad knows you're coming," she said after a moment. "He agreed to meet tomorrow morning at his club. Private dining room." Walter's Club, the exclusive Commonwealth club where Boston's business elite had networked for generations. Another strategic choice of territory, reinforcing his position in the established order despite his current financial challenges. "How? Did he react when you told him Summit was interested?" I asked. Rebecca kept her eyes on the road. "He said he'd expected it, that Marcus Wong would naturally send his attack dog to twist the knife." I winced. "And when you clarified it was my initiative?" "That's when he agreed to the meeting," she replied simply. "The Four Seasons welcomed me with impersonal luxury, a fitting environment for the liminal space I now occupied, neither fully separated from Boston nor truly part of it anymore. From my room, I could see the Boston Common, where Rebecca and I had once walked on Sunday afternoons, discussing future plans that had always, inevitably, orbited around Harrison Enterprises. As evening fell, I finalized my presentation for Walter, reviewing valuation models and acquisition terms. The offer was genuinely fair, above market value for properties that were underperforming due to outdated management approaches. Yet I knew Walter would see not just the business proposition, but the implicit critique of his leadership, his vision, his legacy. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel Harrison, the first direct communication since I'd left Boston. "Heard you're back. Drinks at Carver's at 9? The invitation surprised me. Daniel and I had maintained a cordial professional relationship during my years at Harrison Enterprises, but we'd never been close. As Walter's son and presumed successor, he'd maintained a careful distance, perhaps viewing me as competition for his father's professional approval. Carver's was a discreet bar near the financial district, frequented by executives seeking conversations away from corporate boardrooms. Daniel was already there when I arrived, nursing a scotch at a corner table. "Mitchell." He nodded as I approached. "Didn't think you'd actually come." "Harrison," I returned the nod, settling into the chair across from him. "Didn't think you'd actually invite me." A ghost of a smile crossed his face as he signaled the waiter. "Still drinking bourbon?" Some things don't change. We observed the social niceties until the drinks arrived. Then Daniel got to the point with characteristic Harrison directness. "You're here about the Marlborough Street properties," he stated. "Summit is interested, yes." Daniel studied me over the rim of his glass. "Is this business or payback?" It was the same question Marcus had asked, the same one I'd been asking myself. "Both," I admitted again. "The properties make financial sense for Summit's portfolio. The fact that they're Harrison Cornerstone assets adds a certain symmetry to the situation." "Dad's taking it hard," Daniel said, surprising me with his candor. "The financial situation, your success at Summit, Rebecca straddling both worlds. His entire worldview is being challenged, and he's not built for adaptation." I considered my next words carefully. "The offer I'm bringing tomorrow is fair, more than fair. Summit sees value in these properties that Harrison Enterprises hasn't been able to realize. This isn't about dismantling your father's legacy, but evolving it." Daniel laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You actually believe that, don't you? That this can be just business, not personal? After everything that happened with the trust, with your departure, with Summit actively targeting our undervalued assets? Would you prefer I let another firm acquire these properties?" I countered. "Someone without any connection to the Harrison legacy, without any interest in preserving what matters while innovating what doesn't?" He fell silent, contemplating his drink. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its defensive edge. "The board's losing confidence. The trust beneficiaries are getting nervous. Dad's refusing to acknowledge how much trouble we're in, insisting he can handle it alone like he always has." "And you?" I asked. "What's your position in all this?" Daniel met my gaze directly. "I'm trying to save what can be saved. The Harrison name still means something in this city. The legacy is worth preserving, even if the old methods aren't working anymore." As we parted ways outside the bar, Daniel hesitated, then extended his hand, a gesture that felt like more than social formality. "For what it's worth," he said, "I argued against excluding you from the trust, told Dad it was short-sighted to treat you as an employee when you were contributing like family." I shook his hand, surprised by the admission. "Thank you for telling me that." He nodded once, then turned to leave, calling over his shoulder, "Good luck tomorrow. Dad's still a formidable negotiator, even with his back against the wall." Morning found me in the private dining room of the Commonwealth Club, surrounded by oil paintings of Boston patriarchs and the quiet efficiency of staff who had served the city's elite for generations. I'd arrived early, setting up my presentation. Materials with methodical precision, a habit formed during my years preparing for Walter's exacting standards. Walter Harrison entered precisely on time, as he did for all appointments. 6 months had changed him more than I'd expected. His shoulders seemed narrower, his face more lined, yet his handshake remained firm, his gaze direct and challenging. "Ethan," he acknowledged, taking his seat at the head of the table. A small but deliberate power move. "You're looking well. Denver agrees with you." "Walter," I returned evenly. "Thank you for meeting with me." He gestured to the waiting server, ordering his usual morning tea without consulting the menu. "I assume you've prepared a comprehensive presentation about how Summit Innovations can rescue Harrison Properties from my mismanagement." The directness caught me off guard. Walter had always favored subtle jabs over confrontational openings. "I've prepared an acquisition proposal for the Marlborough Street commercial block," I confirmed, keeping my tone professional. "Based on our valuation models, Summit is prepared to offer 8% above current market assessment." Walter's eyebrow raised slightly, the closest he came to showing surprise in business settings. "Why?" "The properties have significant untapped potential," I explained, bringing up the first slides of my presentation. Our AI valuation models have identified opportunities for technology integration that could increase revenue by 12 to 15% within 18 months. The same technologies I rejected when you proposed them at Harrison Enterprises, Walter observed, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. Yes, I acknowledged. The market has validated those approaches since then. For the next 40 minutes, I outlined Summit's vision for the properties, preserving their architectural significance while modernizing their functionality, maintaining the Harrison name on the buildings while introducing innovations that would make them more valuable, more efficient, more competitive in a changing market. Walter listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing as I detailed how Summit would transform properties his family had managed for generations. When I finished, he sat back, fingers steepled in his characteristic thinking pose. An impressive proposal, he said finally. Thorough, forward-thinking, respectful of legacy while embracing innovation. Exactly what I would expect from you. I waited, knowing Walter rarely revealed his position early in negotiations. Why these properties specifically? He asked after a moment. Summit has been selectively acquiring across Boston. Why target the Harrison Cornerstone assets? The question demanded honesty rather than strategic positioning. Because they represent the best of what Harrison Enterprises built: prime locations, historical significance, quality construction, paired with the worst of its limitations: resistance to technological integration, outdated management models, excessive sentimentality in business decisions. Walter's eyes narrowed slightly. You're suggesting Summit can succeed where 3 generations of Harrisons have failed? I'm suggesting that what made Harrison Enterprises successful for 3 generations isn't sufficient for the next 3, I replied carefully. The market has changed, technology has changed, investment patterns have changed. Summit has the tools to adapt to those changes while preserving what makes these properties special. And what makes them special, in your assessment? Walter challenged. The Harrison vision, I said simply. The understanding that buildings aren't just assets but components of a city's identity. The commitment to quality that outlasts market cycles. Those principles aren't outdated, just the methods of implementing them. Something shifted in Walter's expression, a momentary softening quickly concealed. And what happens to the Harrison name on these buildings if Summit acquires them? It stays, I assured him. These buildings are Harrison landmarks. Removing the name would diminish their value and their place in Boston's landscape. Walter stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the Boston Common. 6 months ago, you walked away from Harrison Enterprises. Today, you're offering to buy its heart. The irony isn't lost on me. I remained seated, letting him control this moment of the conversation. 6 months ago, I discovered I wasn't considered family, despite 5 years of dedication. Today, I'm approaching this as a business transaction between equals, the positioning you always preferred. He turned from the window, studying me with new awareness. And Rebecca? Where does she stand in all this? Rebecca knows I'm here, knows about the offer. She's not involved in the negotiation. But she's involved with you, Walter pressed. Living in Denver part-time, working outside the family business for the first time in her life. The trust terms. This isn't about the trust, I interrupted, surprising both of us with my directness. This is about the Marlborough Street properties, and whether Harrison Enterprises is better served by selling them to Summit or to another buyer with no connection to their history. Walter returned to the table, gathering his notes with deliberate movements. I'll review your proposal with the board. You'll have our response within the week. As he reached the door, he paused, turning back with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. For what it's worth, Ethan, the trust revision was scheduled for your 5-year employment anniversary. The exclusion you discovered was temporary, not permanent. Before I could process this revelation, he was gone. leaving me alone in the private dining room surrounded by portraits of Boston patriarchs who had built legacies they assumed would endure unchanged forever. Walter's parting words followed me back to the Four Seasons, echoing in my mind as I tried to make sense of their implications. The trust revision was scheduled for your 5-year employment anniversary. The exclusion you discovered was temporary, not permanent. If true, it reframed everything. My discovery of the trust document, my abrupt departure, the narrative I'd constructed about my place in the Harrison world. I stood at the hotel window, watching Boston's familiar skyline as afternoon shadows lengthened across the city. Buildings bearing the Harrison name dotted the landscape, monuments to a legacy I'd once helped build and now viewed from a completely different perspective. 6 months of distance had transformed not just my career, but my understanding of what had happened between the Harrisons and me. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "How did it go with Dad?" I typed back, "Professional, cordial. He's reviewing the offer with the board." Her response came quickly. "That's it? No fireworks?" "He mentioned something about the trust," I replied after a moment's hesitation. "Said the exclusion was meant to be temporary, scheduled to change at my 5-year mark." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, "Family dinner at the house tonight. 7 p.m. You should come." The invitation startled me. The Harrison family dinner was a sacred institution held every Sunday in the formal dining room of Walter and Victoria's Brookline mansion. During my years in Boston, these dinners had been both battlefield and theater, a place where family triumphs were celebrated, conflicts aired in carefully modulated tones, and Harrison traditions reinforced. "Not sure that's a good idea," I responded. "I'm here on business." "Please," Rebecca wrote, "there's something you need to see." 5 hours later, I found myself driving a rental car through the familiar gates of the Harrison estate, a sprawling colonial property that had housed 4 generations of the family. The gravel driveway crunched beneath my tires as I approached, the house where I'd once been welcomed as Rebecca's husband, but never fully as a Harrison. Rebecca met me at the door, reaching up to straighten my tie in a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "Thank you for coming," she murmured. "This is important." The foyer smelled of lemon polish and history, the antique grandfather clock, ticking away the moments just as it had during my previous life here. Family portraits lined the hallway, generations of Harrisons captured in increasingly formal poses, their expressions growing more confident with each passing decade of wealth. Accumulation. Victoria Harrison emerged from the formal living room, her posture perfect as always, pearls gleaming against her silk blouse. Her expression betrayed momentary surprise before settling into practiced social grace. "Ethan," she said, voice cool, but not hostile. "Rebecca mentioned you might join us this evening." "Thank you for having me," I replied with matching formality. We'd never developed the easy relationship I'd hoped for, Victoria's loyalty to Walter and the Harrison legacy creating an invisible barrier between us. "Walter is in his study," she continued. "Dinner will be served at 7 sharp as always." As Victoria retreated to oversee final dinner preparations, Rebecca led me toward Walter's study, the inner sanctum where family business was conducted away from even the trusted household staff. Daniel and Natalie were already there, engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with their father. "It's the only sensible option," Daniel was saying as we entered. "The board agrees unanimously." "The board doesn't control this family," Walter replied, his back to the door as he stared out the window toward the grounds that had been in Harrison hands for nearly a century. Natalie noticed us first, her expression shifting from frustration to something like relief. "Ethan, good. Maybe you can talk some sense into him." Walter turned, his face revealing momentary vulnerability before the familiar mask of control slipped back into place. "I wasn't expecting you until dinner." "I asked him to come early," Rebecca explained, moving to stand beside me in a subtle show of solidarity. He should be part of this conversation. I glanced between the Harrison siblings, sensing a strategy I hadn't been briefed on. Part of what conversation? Daniel gestured to the documents spread across Walter's desk: financial statements, property assessments, board recommendations. We're discussing the future of Harrison Enterprises. More specifically, how to salvage what remains of it before the market discovers how overextended we are. Walter's jaw tightened. We're discussing options, not foregone conclusions. Dad, the numbers don't lie, Natalie said, frustration evident in her voice. The Connecticut projects are bleeding money. The Rhode Island development is 2 years behind schedule and $20 million over budget. We have to stem the losses now. I moved closer to examine the documents, professional instinct overriding personal complications. The financial statements confirmed what Rebecca had described. Harrison Enterprises was in serious trouble, with cash reserves depleted and debt levels rising to dangerous thresholds. What's the board recommending? I asked. Daniel met my gaze directly. A strategic partnership with Summit Innovations. The words landed like a physical blow, disrupting my understanding of why I'd been invited tonight. I'm sorry, what? Not my recommendation, Walter clarified quickly. The boards? After reviewing your proposal for the Marlborough Street properties, they've suggested a broader conversation about integration of Summit's technology across the entire Harrison portfolio. I looked to Rebecca, who nodded confirmation. The board reached out to Marcus directly after your meeting this morning. He called me and I called Daniel. You knew about this? I asked her. I knew the board was considering options, she replied carefully. I didn't know they'd move this quickly. Walter settled into his leather chair, the symbol of patriarchal authority he'd occupied for decades. The board seems to believe that Summit's technological approach, combined with the Harrison name and property holdings, could create something stronger than either company could achieve alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. This had been precisely my argument during my final 2 years at Harrison Enterprises, when I'd repeatedly pushed for technology integration, only to be rebuffed by Walter's insistence that traditional methods had served the company well for generations. And what do you think? I asked Walter directly. He met my gaze, the calculation in his eyes familiar from countless negotiations. I think Summit is using Harrison's temporary difficulties to orchestrate a takeover dressed up as a partnership. Dad, Daniel interjected, that's not fair. Summit's offer values Harrison at a premium to current market. Most importantly, it preserves the family name and legacy while adding the technological infrastructure we've needed for years. The infrastructure Ethan tried to implement before he left, Natalie added pointedly. Walter's expression darkened. A convenient narrative. Ethan departs abruptly, joins our emerging competitor, and 6 months later they're positioned to acquire us when we're most vulnerable. The accusation hung in the air, its implications clear. Before I could respond, Victoria appeared at the doorway, her expression revealing nothing of the tension she must have sensed. Dinner is served, she announced with practiced calm. Perhaps we could continue this discussion at the table? The Harrison dining room remained exactly as I remembered. The gleaming mahogany table that seated 16, the crystal chandelier casting warm light over ancestral silver, the portrait of Walter's father watching proceedings with painted gravity. Taking my seat beside Rebecca felt like stepping into a dream of my former life, both familiar and fundamentally altered by everything that had transpired. Conversation during the first course remained deliberately neutral. Boston weather, a charity gala Victoria was organizing, Natalie's recent trip to London. The Harrison way had always been to maintain social graces even when business conflicts simmered beneath the surface. It was Daniel who finally broke the facade, setting down his fork with deliberate precision. We should discuss the Summit proposal, all of us, together, as a family. Walter's expression tightened. Is this why you orchestrated Ethan's presence tonight? A united front against my judgment? No one's against you, Dad, Rebecca said quietly. We're trying to save what you've built before it's too late. By selling to the company that's been systematically targeting our undervalued assets? Walter challenged, turning his gaze to me. Summit's strategy in Boston has been remarkably focused on Harrison properties and development zones, almost as if they had inside information about our vulnerabilities. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Summit's strategy targeted undervalued assets across Boston, I replied evenly. The fact that many were Harrison properties reflects your company's resistance to market realities, not corporate espionage. Yet here we are, Walter continued, with Summit positioned to acquire Harrison Enterprises at precisely our most vulnerable moment. A coincidence, I'm sure. Victoria placed a hand on her husband's arm, a gesture I'd seen countless times when she sensed he was losing the careful control he prized. Walter, perhaps we should listen to what Ethan has to say. He understands both companies in ways none of us do. All eyes turned to me, waiting. The moment felt weighted with significance beyond the business proposition on the table. This was about family, legacy, trust broken and potentially rebuilt. I didn't come to Boston planning this, I began carefully. Summit was interested in the Marlborough Street properties as individual acquisitions, not as part of a larger integration with Harrison Enterprises. The board's proposal is new to me. But you don't seem surprised by our financial situation, Walter observed. No, I acknowledged. I've been monitoring Harrison performance since I left, not out of malice, but because these companies, these properties, were my professional focus for 5 years. Old habits die hard. Daniel leaned forward. The real question is whether a Summit partnership makes sense, not how we got here, but where we go now. I considered my words carefully, aware of the complex personal and professional currents flowing around the table. Harrison Enterprises has extraordinary assets, premier properties, deep market knowledge, a respected legacy. What it lacks is technological infrastructure to maximize those assets in a changing market. Precisely what you argued for before. You left, Natalie pointed out. Yes, I agreed. The market has only moved further in that direction since then. Summit has the technology, but lacks Harrison's property portfolio and generational expertise. Together, they could create something genuinely transformative. Walter's expression remained skeptical. A convenient assessment from Summit's chief strategy officer. I'm speaking as someone who cares about both companies, I countered. And about this family, despite everything that's happened. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Victoria broke it with practiced social grace, suggesting we move to the drawing room for coffee. As the others stood, Walter caught my eye, a subtle gesture indicating I should remain behind. When we were alone, he spoke with unexpected directness. Why did you really come back to Boston, Ethan? To acquire our properties? To prove your success? Or something else entirely? The question demanded honesty rather than strategy. All of those reasons, I admitted. The properties make business sense for Summit. Showing what I've built in 6 months away from Harrison validation matters after being treated as dispensable. But mostly, I hesitated. Mostly, I needed to close this chapter properly, not through abrupt departure but deliberate resolution. Walter studied me with the piercing gaze that had intimidated countless negotiating partners over decades. The trust document you found was preliminary, he said finally. The official revision, scheduled for your 5-year employment anniversary, included you as a full beneficiary, equal standing with family members by birth. The confirmation of what he'd hinted at earlier sent a jolt through me. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Harrison tradition, Walter replied, as if that explained everything. Family members by marriage earn inclusion through demonstrated commitment and loyalty. 5 years has been the standard since my grandfather's time. Your discovery of the preliminary document was unfortunate timing. Unfortunate timing, I repeated, the phrase utterly inadequate to describe how that discovery had altered the course of my life. You could have explained this when I resigned. You could have told me I was weeks away from full inclusion. Walter's expression hardened. You presented your resignation as final. Your departure was abrupt. Your mind clearly made up. Would knowing about the planned revision have changed your decision? The question caught me off guard. Would it have changed things? Would I have stayed at Harrison Enterprises if I'd known full acceptance was imminent? Or had the discovery merely accelerated a departure that was ultimately necessary for my professional growth? I don't know, I answered honestly, but I deserved the chance to make that decision with complete information. Walter nodded slowly, acknowledging the point without verbally conceding it. The situation with Summit. It's not what I envisioned for Harrison Enterprises. Not how I planned to conclude my stewardship of this company. For the first time, I saw past the formidable businessman to the man beneath, someone facing the potential end of a legacy he'd spent his life building and protecting. Despite everything that had transpired between us, I felt an unexpected surge of empathy. It doesn't have to be a conclusion, I offered. It could be an evolution. The Harrison name, the Harrison properties, the Harrison approach to quality, and longevity. Those don't disappear in a partnership with Summit. They're strengthened by new capabilities, new markets, new opportunities. Walter stood, moving to the sideboard where crystal decanters of aged spirits gleamed in the dining room's subdued lighting. He poured 2 glasses of his prized scotch, handing one to me in a gesture that felt significant in its casualness. "When I was your age," he said, swirling the amber liquid, "my father controlled everything. The company, the trust, access to information, all of it. I vowed I'd be different with my children." A rueful smile crossed his face. Yet here we are, having almost the same conversation I had with him 30 years ago when market conditions forced changes he resisted. History rhymes, I observed, accepting the rare moment of personal disclosure. "Indeed," Walter agreed. "Though in my case I didn't have the option my children have chosen, bringing in an outsider who understands both worlds." The implication hung between us, neither of us addressing it directly. We sipped our scotch in a silence that felt, if not comfortable, at least less adversarial than any moment we'd shared in recent memory. When we finally joined the others in the drawing room, something had shifted. Victoria noticed immediately, her practiced social awareness detecting the changed dynamic between her husband and me. "Walter," she prompted gently, "have you reached any conclusions?" He met my gaze briefly before addressing his family. "I'm willing to continue discussions with Summit's board about potential partnership structures, with conditions." Daniel didn't bother concealing his relief. "What conditions?" "Harrison maintains naming rights on all legacy properties," Walter began. "The family trust remains intact, with modifications to reflect the new corporate structure. And..." He glanced at me. "Ethan oversees the integration of Harrison Holdings into the Summit technology platform. He understands both companies, both approaches. If anyone can preserve what matters while embracing necessary change, it's him." The stipulation caught me by surprise. After months of viewing me as a defector, Walter was essentially positioning me as the bridge between Harrison tradition and Summit innovation, a role that acknowledged both my history with the family and my success outside it. "I'd need to discuss this with Marcus," I said carefully, "but conceptually it makes sense." Rebecca's hand found mine beneath the table, a private gesture of support amidst the business discussion. The touch reminded me that beyond corporate structures and legacy properties, real relationships hung in the balance, relationships damaged by misunderstanding and pride, potentially healed through honest communication and shared purpose. As coffee concluded and the evening drew to a close, Victoria surprised me with an unexpected question. Will you be staying in Boston long, Ethan? The query carried layers of meaning beyond its surface simplicity. My return flight is scheduled for tomorrow evening, I replied. But given these developments, I'll likely be extending my stay. She nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. The guest room is prepared, should you wish to stay here rather than at the hotel. The invitation represented more than practical accommodation. It was Victoria's way of signaling acceptance, of acknowledging my place in family discussions about Harrison's future. Walter's slight nod confirmed the gesture was intentional, part of a carefully orchestrated family repositioning. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by the overture. But I think the hotel makes more sense for now. Professional boundaries seem important while we're navigating these negotiations. As I prepared to leave, Daniel pulled me aside in the foyer. That went better than expected, he observed, keeping his voice low. Dad never admits when he's wrong, but he came pretty close tonight. He's protecting the legacy, I replied. As he's always done. Daniel studied me with new respect. You know, when you left, I thought you were running away from a challenge. Now I see you were running toward something better, for yourself and, ironically, for all of us. Rebecca appeared with my coat, her expression revealing the emotional complexity of the evening. As we stepped onto the porch, she took my hand, the simple contact bridging months of distance and misunderstanding. Will you really stay longer? She asked, hope evident in her voice. I need to call Marcus. Discuss the board's proposal and Walter's conditions, I replied. But yes, I think a longer stay makes sense given what's happening. The night air was crisp with early autumn, the Harrison estate grounds illuminated by strategically placed landscape lighting that highlighted century-old trees and manicured gardens. In the distance, Boston's skyline glittered, a city shaped by generations of families like the Harrisons and now evolving through the influence of innovators like Summit. I never told you about the trust revision, Rebecca said suddenly, her voice tight with emotion. I knew it was coming, knew you were weeks away from full inclusion, and I never warned you about the temporary exclusion. That's why you left, and it's my fault for not explaining. The admission struck at the heart of what had driven us apart 6 months earlier. Why didn't you tell me? She looked away, embarrassment coloring her features. Because it was a ridiculous tradition that I'd grown up accepting without question. Because I was caught between loyalty to my family's ways and loyalty to you. Because I thought you'd be the exception, that Dad would include you early based on your contributions. She met my gaze, eyes glistening. By the time I realized he was going to stick to tradition, it was too late. You found the preliminary document before I found the courage to explain. The honesty of her response disarmed the lingering resentment I'd carried. We both made mistakes, I acknowledged. I reacted to incomplete information by making an irrevocable decision, walked away from our marriage in the process. And built something remarkable, she added. Something that might now save what my family spent generations creating. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. My departure, meant as rejection, of the Harrison world, had ultimately led to a potential salvation for the very legacy that had excluded me. Back at the Four Seasons, I placed the call to Marcus, outlining the unexpected developments of the evening. His initial skepticism gave way to strategic interest as I explained the potential structure Walter had proposed. So, instead of acquiring a few properties, we potentially merge with the entire Harrison operation, he summarized, with you as the bridge between organizations. The Harrison board approached yours directly, I reminded him. This wasn't my initiative. But you don't sound opposed, Marcus observed. I considered his assessment. Professionally, it makes sense. Harrison's portfolio combined with Summit's technology creates something stronger than either company alone. Personally, I hesitated. It offers resolution that simple acquisition of properties wouldn't provide. Marcus's silence suggested he was weighing multiple dimensions of the proposal. And Rebecca? Where does she factor into this equation? The question cut to the heart of complexities I'd been avoiding. She's part of the Harrison side of the equation, both professionally and personally. But we're finding our way back to common ground, I think. You think? Marcus pressed. Before we pursue a corporate integration that puts you at the center of Harrison Summit relations, I need clarity on the personal dynamics. Are you reconciling with your wife or maintaining professional distance from the Harrisons? It was a fair question, one that demanded honesty rather than strategic positioning. I don't know yet, I admitted. Tonight changed things. Learning the trust exclusion was temporary rather than permanent. Seeing Walter acknowledge the need for evolution rather than resistance. It reframes what happened 6 months ago. But doesn't erase it, Marcus pointed out. No, I agreed. It doesn't erase anything, but it might allow something new to be built on foundations that seemed broken beyond repair. After we hung up, I stood at the hotel window watching Boston's nighttime skyline, buildings bearing the Harrison name interspersed with newer developments like those Summit had begun acquiring. The city's architecture told the story of its evolution, tradition and innovation coexisting in visual harmony, despite the tensions that drove their creation. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Thank you for tonight, for listening, for engaging, for seeing possibilities instead of just past hurts. I typed back, nothing's resolved yet, but it feels like a beginning rather than an ending. Her response came quickly. Beginnings are more interesting anyway. Breakfast tomorrow? There's a new place in Seaport you'd love. As I set the phone down, I realized the tension that had accompanied my return to Boston had transformed into something different. Not the vindication I'd half expected to feel when facing the Harrisons from my position of newfound success, but something more complex and ultimately more valuable. Understanding. Perspective. The possibility of integration rather than victory. My laptop screen glowed with financial models comparing Harrison and Summit valuations, potential synergies, integration timelines. The business case was compelling, the strategic rationale sound. Yet beneath the spreadsheets and projections lay the real challenge, rebuilding trust damaged by misunderstanding and pride on both sides. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd walked away from Harrison Enterprises because I wasn't included in the family trust. Now I was positioned to help integrate that very trust into a new entity, potentially with myself at the center of the bridge between old and new. Walter's voice echoed in my mind. If anyone can preserve what matters while embracing necessary change, it's you. The statement represented more than a business assessment. It was an acknowledgement of my unique position straddling both worlds, understanding both the value of Harrison tradition and the necessity of Summit innovation. Dawn found me still awake, watching as Boston emerged from darkness into the golden light of a new day. Buildings that had stood for generations caught the first rays of sun alongside glass towers of recent construction. A visual metaphor for what might be possible in the merger Walter had reluctantly begun to consider. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Board meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. Your presence requested. Formal or not, your family in this discussion. Family. The word carried weight beyond its biological meaning in the Harrison context. That, Daniel would use it in reference to me, after everything that had transpired, suggested a shift in the family's perspective, or perhaps an acknowledgement of truths that had been present all along, obscured by tradition and expectation. As I prepared for the meeting that might determine the future of both Harrison Enterprises and my relationship with the family that had simultaneously embraced and excluded me, I found myself thinking not of business metrics or negotiation strategies, but of Rebecca's words the previous night. Beginnings are more interesting anyway. 6 months ago, I'd left Boston believing I was closing a chapter defined by rejection. Now I stood poised to open something new, not erasing the past but building upon it, preserving what mattered while embracing necessary change. The question that remained as I straightened my tie and prepared to face the Harrison board was whether corporate integration could truly heal personal wounds, whether business partnership could rebuild the trust that had been broken on both sides. The answer, I suspected, wouldn't be found in merger documents or integration timelines, but in the small moments of honesty and vulnerability that had begun to emerge from beneath layers of pride and tradition. In Rebecca's acknowledgement of her silence, in Walter's admission of his father's similar resistance to change, in Daniel's unexpected alliance, the foundation for something new was already taking shape. Whether it would be strong enough to support both corporate merger and personal reconciliation remained to be seen. But for the first time since discovering my exclusion from the Harrison Trust, I found myself genuinely hopeful about the possibilities that lay ahead, not just for Summit and Harrison Enterprises, but for the human relationships that gave those business entities meaning beyond balance sheets and property portfolios. The Harrison Enterprises boardroom felt both familiar and foreign as I took my seat at the table where I'd once been just Rebecca's husband, an employee with exceptional value but limited standing. Today, I represented not only Summit Innovations, but a potential bridge between two companies, two approaches, two eras of Boston real estate development. Walter entered last, as protocol demanded, with Victoria a step behind him. The Harrison siblings were already seated, Daniel looking cautiously optimistic, Natalie preoccupied with her tablet, Rebecca offering me a small smile of encouragement. Board members studied me with unconcealed curiosity, these power brokers, who had known me for years but were seeing me anew through the lens of my success at Summit. We're here to discuss the proposed integration of Harrison Enterprises and Summit Innovations, Walter began, his voice steady despite the momentous nature of the occasion. A partnership that would preserve our legacy while embracing technological innovation essential for future growth. The words could have been lifted directly from presentations I'd made during my final year at Harrison, presentations that had been politely acknowledged and promptly shelved. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. For the next hour, financial projections and integration timelines dominated the discussion. The business case was compelling. Harrison's premium property portfolio, enhanced by Summit's technological infrastructure, creating an entity stronger than either company alone. What remained unspoken, yet palpable in every exchange, were the personal dynamics underlying the corporate strategy. When the presentation concluded, Walter did something unprecedented. He asked everyone except immediate family to leave the room. As the door closed behind the last board member, Walter turned to me. "Before we proceed further, there's something that needs to be addressed." He placed a document on the table, sliding it toward me. "The completed trust revision that would have been presented at your 5-year anniversary with Harrison Enterprises." The document bore the Harrison family crest and legal seals confirming its authenticity. My name appeared among the beneficiaries, not as Rebecca's husband, but as Ethan Mitchell, Executive Director, Harrison Enterprises, with full and equal standing among family members. "Why show me this now?" I asked, emotion threatening to derail the professional demeanor I'd maintained throughout the meeting. "Because partnership, whether between companies or within families, requires truth," Walter replied. "I failed to provide that when it mattered most. The result was 6 months of division that benefited no one." Victoria placed her hand over her husband's, a gesture of support I'd seen countless times during family discussions. "What my husband is trying to say, Ethan, is that we made a mistake. The trust was always meant to include you. The timing and tradition were unfortunate, but the intention was clear." Daniel leaned forward. "The question now is whether corporate integration can repair personal bridges, whether Summit and Harrison can merge more successfully than the Mitchell and Harrison families did." The question hung in the air, its implications extending far beyond business strategy into territory rarely broached in the Harrison boardroom. Genuine emotion, vulnerability, the human cost of family traditions, maintained without explanation or context. Rebecca's voice broke the silence. 6 months ago, we all made choices based on incomplete information and rigid positions. Today, we have the opportunity to choose differently. I looked around the table at the family that had simultaneously embraced and excluded me, seeing them with new clarity after months of distance. Walter's stubborn adherence to tradition masked a deep commitment to preserving what his ancestors had built. Victoria's formal demeanor concealed fierce protection of her family's well-being. Daniel and Natalie's competitive positioning within the family business stemmed from desire for their father's approval, something I'd sought myself during my years at Harrison. I believe in the business case for integration, I said finally. Harrison Properties managed through Summit Technology creates genuine value. But more importantly, I believe in the possibility of building something that honors tradition while embracing necessary change, in business and in family. Walter nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Then let's proceed with the merger discussions, with you as the bridge between organizations, between families. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and negotiations. Marcus flew in from Denver, bringing his characteristic energy and innovation focus to discussions with Harrison board members who initially viewed him with the wariness reserved for disruptors of established order. "Your father-in-law is exactly as advertised," Marcus commented one evening as we reviewed integration timelines in my hotel suite. Stubborn, methodical, and surprisingly shrewd, despite his attachment to tradition. "He's adapting more quickly than I expected," I admitted. "The financial reality has forced flexibility he wouldn't have considered 6 months ago." Marcus studied me over the rim of his coffee cup. "And the personal reality? How's that adaptation progressing?" It was a fair question. While the business, integration was advancing through clearly defined stages. The personal reconciliation followed a less structured path. Rebecca and I had established a tentative routine: dinners together, weekends exploring both familiar Boston haunts and places we'd never visited during our marriage, conversations that increasingly bridged the gap between our separate 6-month journeys. "It's a work in progress," I replied honestly. "Like the merger, we're figuring out how to integrate what works from our past with what we've each learned while apart." The merger announcement made headlines in both Boston business publications and national real estate journals. Harrison Summit merger creates tech-enabled real estate powerhouse. Financial analysts praised the strategic vision. Industry observers noted the symbolism of old and new economies finding common ground. And Boston society pages speculated about what the integration meant for the Harrison family dynasty. What none of these perspectives captured was the human transformation underlying the corporate strategy. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I stood with Walter on the roof deck of Harrison Enterprises headquarters, looking out over the Boston skyline dotted with buildings bearing the Harrison name. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city, highlighting both historic architecture and modern development in a visual representation of the past and future we were attempting to integrate. "My father brought me up here when I turned 30, Walter said, breaking our companionable silence. Pointed to each Harrison property and told me, "What we build outlasts us, so build with that in mind." It was his version of passing the torch. I nodded, understanding the weight of legacy that had shaped Walter's leadership for decades. And now we're reshaping that legacy. "Preserving its essence while evolving its form," Walter corrected, the distinction clearly important to him. "What matters isn't that every decision remains the same across generations, but that the core principles endure: quality, longevity, contribution to the city's fabric." It was the most direct acknowledgement he'd ever offered that change could coexist with tradition, that evolution didn't necessarily mean betrayal of the past. Coming from Walter Harrison, It represented a seismic shift in worldview. I misjudged. You, Ethan, he continued, his gaze still fixed on the city spread before us, interpreted your push for innovation as rejection of tradition rather than enhancement of it. By the time I recognized my error, you were gone. And I misjudged your resistance, I acknowledged. Saw it as stubborn entrenchment rather than protection of what you valued most. Walter turned to face me directly. The trust document was handled poorly. A tradition meant to ensure commitment became a tool of exclusion. For that, I owe you an apology, not just as Rebecca's husband, but as someone who contributed significantly to this company's success. The words clearly didn't come easily to him. Walter Harrison rarely apologized, considering it a sign of weakness rather than strength. That he offered this acknowledgement now, without qualification or deflection, reflected genuine evolution in his thinking. We both made decisions based on incomplete understanding, I replied. What matters now is what we build going forward. A month into the integration process, Rebecca and I faced our own critical decision point. With the merger proceeding through established phases, my role as integration leader required presence in both Boston and Denver. The professional solution was straightforward: divide time between locations as needed. The personal implications proved more complex. We could maintain 2 residences, Rebecca suggested as we discussed logistics over dinner at our favorite Boston restaurant. You've built a life in Denver that matters to you. I've started finding my own path here, separate from family expectations. Long-distance marriage, I noted, testing how the concept felt. Is that what you want? She considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. What I want is for us both to feel fulfilled professionally and personally. If that means splitting time between cities while we figure out a long-term solution, I'm willing to try. The answer reflected how much Rebecca had changed during our months apart. The woman who had once deferred to family expectations without question now prioritized mutual fulfillment over conventional arrangements. There's something else to consider, she added, meeting my gaze directly. Daniel's been approached about leading Harrison Enterprises' European expansion. If he takes it, there will be a leadership vacuum here in Boston. The implication was clear. With Daniel potentially departing, the merged organization would need experienced leadership for the Boston operation, someone who understood both Harrison tradition and Summit innovation. Someone precisely like me. Moving back to Boston permanently wasn't in my plans, I admitted. Denver represents independence, growth on my own terms. And Boston represents what? Rebecca asked, not confrontationally but with genuine curiosity. I considered the question. 6 months ago, Boston had represented limitation, exclusion, constant effort to prove my worth to a family that viewed me as peripheral. Now, with the merger redefining relationships and Walter's unexpected evolution, creating space for genuine partnership, the city carried different associations. Unfinished business, I answered finally, both professionally and personally. Rebecca nodded, understanding the nuance in my response. Then perhaps we need to finish that business before deciding where we ultimately belong. 2 months after the initial board meeting, the merger entered its final implementation phase. Harrison Properties began integrating Summit's technology platform, starting with the cornerstone Marlborough Street commercial block that had been in the family portfolio for 3 generations. Walter had insisted on beginning with this symbolic property, a decision that reflected his commitment to demonstrating that even the most historic Harrison holdings could benefit from technological enhancement. I stood in the lobby of the Marlborough Street building on implementation day, watching as technicians installed digital infrastructure that would transform how the property functioned. Rebecca joined me, sliding her hand into mine with casual intimacy that felt both familiar and newly significant. The signage arrives tomorrow, she noted, gesturing toward the entrance where the Harrison Enterprises logo would be replaced with newly designed Harrison Summit Properties branding. Both names, equal prominence. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Equal partnership, equal value, equal respect, principles that extended beyond corporate identity into the personal relationships that had been strained, broken, and now carefully reconstructed. "Your father approved the final design?" I asked, still adjusting to Walter's newfound flexibility. Rebecca smiled. "He suggested it. Said if we're genuinely integrating rather than one side absorbing the other, the visual identity should reflect that reality." Walter himself appeared a moment later, stepping through the revolving doors with Victoria at his side. They paused, taking in the transformation underway in the building that had represented core Harrison values for decades. "Different from what I imagined for this property," Walter acknowledged, running his hand along the marble wall where interactive displays would soon showcase the building's history alongside its technological enhancements, but perhaps better suited for the future than my father's vision was. Victoria stepped forward, surprising me with a warm embrace that broke with her usual formal reserve. "We're hosting a family dinner tonight to celebrate this milestone," she said. "The beginning of a new chapter for Harrison Summit, and for all of us." The invitation carried weight beyond social obligation. Victoria's embrace, Walter's acknowledgement of positive change, the deliberate inclusion of Summit's name alongside Harrison in the company branding, all represented evolutions I couldn't have imagined 6 months earlier when I'd discovered my exclusion from the family trust. That evening, gathered around the Harrison dining table with both immediate family and Marcus representing Summit, the conversation flowed more naturally than any family dinner I'd experienced in my previous life in Boston. Walter, still occupied, the head of the table, still maintained his patriarchal presence, but something fundamental had shifted in the family dynamic. To partnerships that strengthen rather than diminish, Walter offered as a toast, raising his glass to Marcus and me, and to bridges between tradition and innovation, past and future, family by birth and family by choice. As glasses clinked around the table, I caught Rebecca's eye. The journey that had begun with betrayal and escape had transformed into something neither of us could have predicted, not a victory of one approach over another, but a genuine integration of complementary strengths. 1 month later, I stood on the balcony of our new Boston apartment, not the Harrison-approved Beacon Hill address we'd occupied during our previous life here, but a contemporary space in the Seaport district that Rebecca and I had chosen together. The view encompassed both historic Boston with its brick and brownstone character and the glass towers of newer development, tradition and innovation coexisting in architectural harmony. Rebecca joined me, wrapping her arms around my waist as we watched the sun set over the harbor. "Daniel accepted the European position," she said. "The board approved your appointment as Executive Director of Boston Operations this afternoon." The news represented formal recognition of what had been evolving organically through the integration process. My position as the bridge between Harrison tradition and Summit innovation, between Boston's real estate past and its technology-enabled. "Sir, are you ready to make Boston home again?" Rebecca asked, the question containing layers of meaning beyond geography. I turned to face her, considering all that had transpired since I'd walked away from Harrison Enterprises 6 months earlier. The journey had been neither linear nor simple, from betrayal to escape, from reinvention to confrontation, from understanding to integration. We had all changed in the process. Myself, Rebecca, Walter, the entire Harrison family structure. "I'm ready to build something that honors the best of what was while creating something new," I replied. "In business and in family." Some trusts," I reflected as we stood together looking out over the city that had shaped both our separate and shared journeys, are measured not in financial assets, but in faith restored, bridges rebuilt, and legacies transformed through honest recognition of both past mistakes and future possibilities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.